Welcome to American Dreams, Keys to Success, with your host, Alan Olson.
Welcome back. I have with me here Ty Cobb. Ty served as a special assistant to President Ronald Reagan for National Security Affairs and also as the executive secretary for President Reagan's summits with Soviet General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev in Geneva in 1985 and Reykjavik. I can't get that name right. Anyways, it's out that place out in Iceland that they all met together in 1986. Anyways, he currently serves as the CEO of Northern Nevada Network. And Ty, welcome to today's show.
Thanks, Alan. It's great to be here.
So, Ty, this is amazing, the history that you've had. Can you give us some background how you got involved with the Reagan administration?
Yes, I had earned a Ph.D. in Soviet studies, actually, from Georgetown, and then was given a scholarship to participate in the official exchange program with the Soviet Union, which I did from 1979 to 81, exploring their national security decision-making and energy posture. And that led me to actually consulting first with the Carter White House, and then when Reagan was elected with him, and then I was asked to come down full-time and join the National Security Council staff, which I did for 6 years.
6 years. So you started in what year?
1983.
1983. And so you actually crossed over one administration to the next.
Well, I was very informal with Carter, and then Reagan was elected in 1980, inaugurated in 81, and I joined officially in 1983 and served there till January 20th, 1989 at 12 o'clock.
So when I think about national security in this time frame, the name Oliver North comes to mind. Do you know him?
Ollie and I worked by each other for 4 years.
Tell me what it was like.
Ollie was a highly competent Marine officer who came over from the Pentagon actually to work on a specific project. It's a AWACS sale of airborne warning aircraft to Saudi Arabia. And they successfully did that, and then he managed to stay on the National Security Council working on terrorism in Central America. Ollie was a gung-ho guy and thought we weren't pursuing the right policies with respect to Central America and on terrorism, and he got frustrated with the elaborate interagency and bureaucratic process and decided to short-circuit it through a venture called the Enterprise. And we all know what happened in the end.
Well, it's history now. So let's go back. Ronald Reagan,
right?
One of a legacy of a president. What was it like working with Reagan?
Always a pleasure. He had a great sense of humor. He could disarm a situation. When you go into the meetings with him, say in the cabinet room, he would always come in with a jar of jelly beans and hand them out, and he had a ready smile. And so it made it, for the most part, easy to work with him. But Alan, he was also a person of very firm convictions that Mikhail Gorbachev found out when they began their series of one-on-one negotiations.
How did that come about with the wall coming down? I know it's written in history, but from your perspective, how did all this start with the falling of the Iron Curtain? And
yeah, when Reagan came in, things were not going very well. The perception was the Soviet leadership was on the move. They were supporting national liberation movements in Angola, Central America, Afghanistan. Their economy seemed to be booming. They were exporting oil. Well, in the United States, to use President Carter's phrase, a sense of malaise had set in. So Reagan just didn't want to deal with the Soviet leaders initially until he got the economy back on track, built up our Defense Department, and most importantly, restored confidence, which he felt he had done by 1983 or 84. Problem on the Soviet side is they kept getting older, the economy was becoming decrepit, and they kept picking older and older leaders until 1985 when they finally selected a relatively young man, Mikhail Gorbachev.
And so Gorbachev was the start of a new
Yes.
reform over there.
Yes.
In the process of coming together, I guess there was also the Pope was appointed somewhere in that period of time.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that the Pope is head of state, technically the head of state of the Holy See, as President Reagan was head of state of the United States, and we dealt with him diplomatically. There was a series of one-on-one meetings where obviously the Pope expressed his concern about the domination of Eastern Europe by the Soviet Union and the Communist parties, particularly his homeland of Poland. And between them, they really worked out a plan for the liberation of Eastern Europe, but specifically Poland.
Wow. Well, I'm here today visiting with Ty Cobb, the Special Assistant to President Ronald Reagan. We've been talking about the days of Reagan and also the changeover from the Soviet Union into society today and opening up a whole new economy there. We'll be right back after these messages.
Nothing's more important than spending time with your family.
At Greenstone Rogo Polson Company, we're trusted advisors to the highly successful. Our goal is to help you find the right strategy to protect your wealth for yourself and those you love. Kids, why do I feel like I've just had an audit?
As trusted advisors to the highly successful, we'll make sure that you don't lose your shirt.
Rogo helping you along the way.
Apple pie, baseball, and now here's All-American Alan Olson.
Welcome back. We're here today with Ty Cobb. Ty served as a Special Assistant to President Ronald Reagan for National Security Affairs. Ty, before the break, we were talking about the Reagan years. We touched point on the Pope and the role that he played in the diplomatic negotiations. I guess would you say he had some level of influence there?
Well, I would say it was beyond just the diplomatic. Between the Pope and the President, they worked out a strategy for dealing with the Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and particularly the imposition of martial law in Poland. And they wanted to support the movements through the Catholic Church and particularly labor, the Solidarity movement led by Lech Walesa. And they also brought in Leonard Woodchuck, who was head of the AFL-CIO. So a lot of people don't realize that in addition to what the Catholic Church was doing, what CIA was doing covertly, that the AFL-CIO was a tremendous support. And between them, eventually they weakened the rule of the Polish military, who requested assistance from the Soviet Union. And at that point in time, the Soviets decided they were not going to intervene as they did in Hungary and Czechoslovakia. And Jaruzelski's government fell, and Lech Walesa became president.
Let's switch over to Margaret Thatcher.
Margaret, yes.
Oh, man. What was it like, working with her?
She was an extremely strong person, and as Meryl Streep captured her. And I could tell you, Alan, she would come into a meeting with the president, no nice side talk to come over and shake our hands. She'd just walk in with Ron, and she said, "Now, Ron, you're going to meet with the Soviet leaders, and this is what we're going to have to do." And he said, "Well, yes, Margaret, I understand. And then they're probably going to want to do this, but we have to." He said, "Yes, Margaret, I'm with you." And then Ron, and he'd kind of look over at us and wink, he knew. But he really valued her support and her advice and her steadfastness. She was probably the leader, along with Prime Minister Mulroney in Canada, that the president was most comfortable with and in line with.
We saw her quite a bit during those years, especially in all these diplomatic negotiations. And
she was central.
Yes.
And she also, Alan, to her credit, when Gorbachev finally came in, they went with a younger leadership. She had met with him first, and she told Reagan famously, "This is somebody we can do business with." And so that told Reagan that, well, maybe we can get somewhere.
So George Shultz, what was
Yes.
what was George like?
He was a very powerful Secretary of State. There were a lot of problems you may recall with Alexander Haig, and about the third time he threatened to resign, the president said, "Well, okay, Alex, it's hate to see you go." And I think Haig was a little surprised that he, in fact, had his resignation been accepted. And Schultz came in and was Secretary of State for the whole time. The difficult is that he and Cap Weinberger, Secretary of Defense, both came out of this area. They're both at Bechtel. But they became at loggerheads on virtually every issue. So there was a constant fight between state and defense, between Cap and George.
Interesting. And George is still around today.
He was at a talk I gave today. He's 91. He looks great, healthy, and very sharp of mind.
Well, that's, he clearly is, and I think he's staying very active with the Stanford group there, too.
And at Hoover, yeah. And I enjoyed working with both of them. And Cap Weinberger, his views were not in line with George's, or as it turned out with the president, on how to deal with the Soviets. But Cap was always a gentleman, and I always dearly loved working with him.
The French President Mitterrand?
Mitterrand. Well, it was really funny, Alan. You say, well, he's a socialist president, well, and he's French, but you have to remember that Mitterrand domestically, where was his political enemies? They were on his left. The communists were his main adversary, and he was very strong in dealing with the Soviet Union. So with respect to that, they were very close. Personally, it was always a lot of friction and animosity between the two, and I'll just tell you a couple of quick stories. Mitterrand came into office in 1981, this is up your alley, and imposed a new socialist economic program, proved to be a disaster. So within 3 years, he said, this isn't working, and turned it around. So we had a summit meeting, and Reagan asked me, he says, Francois, tell me about this program.
We have to take a quick break.
Okay.
Hold this thought. We'll be right back after these messages.
Protecting your family's health and welfare is a sacred trust. At Greenstein Rogoff Olson Company, we know that sound financial planning will protect them now and in the future. We're certified public accountants with tax services for the highly successful and voted best CPA firm in the USA.
Greenstein Rogoff Olson Company will help you manage your financial affairs so you can focus on what's really important in life.
Roco helping you along the way.
Apple pie, baseball, and now here's All-American Alan Olson.
Welcome back. We're talking here today with Ty Cobb. Ty served as a special assistant to President Ronald Reagan for the National Security Affairs. And before the break, he was telling us the story about President Mitterrand, the French president at the time that Reagan was there. Let's go back in.
Well, what happened is there was friction between the two, and Reagan had an economic program that was difficult at first. As you recall, it began to pick up speed by 83 and 84. In contrast, Mitterrand imposed a socialist economic program that took the country downhill. He reversed course in 83. So at a summit meeting, President Reagan said, well, Francois, tell me about your new economic program. So Mitterrand started to tell him, and Reagan said, well, I don't know, but it sounds an awful lot like Reaganomics to me. And one other quick one. We had a meeting with the French on the margins of the G7 Economic Summit in London, and 7 people on the French side came, and including this lovely young lady who looked like Brigitte Bardot did in the 50s. And as they left, President Reagan turned to our ambassador, Van Galbraith, and said, Van, who was that lovely young lady with Mitterrand? And Van said, oh, Mr. President, that's Yvette Guizot. And he said, well, what does she do? Well, that's his economics advisor. And remember, Marty Feldstein was Reagan's, and Reagan said, well, what does she know about and Van said, oh, Mr. President, he says, that's okay, Van. I'll tell you what, next time you see Francois, tell him I'll trade him straight across for Marty Feldstein. And I'll throw in a Cadillac.
Fun years. Well,
Yeah.
so to summarize the Reagan years.
I think, you look back, and we did the Reykjavik summit and made great advances. In 87, we signed the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. We were reducing the size of our nuclear arsenals. They signed a strategic arms treaty in 88. Reagan made a triumphant visit to Moscow. He left office in January 89, but remember, you referenced the speech at Brandenburg Gate in 1987 where he said, Mr. Gorbachev, if you believe in peace, tear down this wall. Well, 6 months after Reagan left office, the wall, in fact, came down. Shortly thereafter, the two Germanys were reunited. The united Germany joined NATO, and in 1991, the Soviet Union itself collapsed, to use the Marxist phrase, on the ash heap of history. And I think back on Reagan's final words from the Oval Office as he was getting ready to leave. He always spoke about trying to achieve that shining city on the hill, and as he reflected back on his years, he judged it as by saying, not bad at all. And I would say, Alan, I agree with the president, not bad at all.
Those were wonderful years, and obviously it changed the course of what we have in the world today.
That's right.
So if we're going to bring this fast forward, what do you think about today?
The political dialogue or absence thereof bothers me. The vitriol that I see from both sides. Reagan could meet with Tip O'Neill, who's the longtime liberal Democrat, ran the House of Representatives. They'd argue during the day, and the president would say, well, Tip, why don't you come over tonight and we'll have a drink? And so the two Irishmen his chat and tell jokes. And I just don't see that civility anymore. Also, I think in Reagan's economic program, he was really firm on the conservative principles. He wanted a low-tax environment, low regulatory imposition on business. And despite having a House of Representatives solidly under Democrat control, I think he was able to make great strides forward in resurrecting the economy from what he got from President Carter.
You know, it seems that what it has been involved in today. You brought out a very good point: the human element.
Yes.
The acknowledging the individual feelings and working together and trying to bring people together and see some type of united consensus.
Yes, and I think under Reagan, we didn't live in an era where government had to do everything, or we expected it to do everything, and we anticipated that we're all going to just simply reap in benefits from government largesse. I think we go back to the Reagan ideals, which rewarded innovation and entrepreneurship and thriftiness, and understood that a rapidly rising debt is a serious national security issue.
So if you had your druthers, what are the solutions for today's world? And I realize there's a lot of things going on out there.
Well, with respect to our economy, I was a supporter of the compromise that was being discussed. On the one hand, it would raise taxes on the wealthy, over $250,000 income from 35 to 39%, but it would have also, more importantly, resulted in $4 trillion reduction in spending. That seemed to me a very reasonable compromise. But what has happened is we continue to spend, our debt just soars.
You know, I was having lunch with Scott McNeely this week,
right.
of Sun Microsystems founder, and he was commenting on his job creation, and he made the comment. He says, "I was a good businessman." He goes, "Larry Ellison was a great businessman. He bought my company at the absolute bottom." He says, "But that doesn't mean I was still good." And so we had a laugh. But then Scott went into this question and answer period, and there was an Asian lady in the audience, and she says, I have a solution for today's economy. And he goes, "Well, what do you have to say?" He goes, "Let's define the middle class by taking off the bottom 1% and say they're not middle class, and the top 1% and they're not middle class, and then say everybody else in the middle is middle class." And Scott looked at her. He says, "That's absolutely brilliant. So much government would go away as a result of that simple thing." But with respect to foreign, I guess the banking system is a lot more complex today, isn't it? The monetary.
Well, everything is, and I think you made a reference to foreign affairs, and I guess we're calling into question the JFK motto, "We'll go anywhere, do anything to support and spread freedom." And we found out how difficult that is in Iraq and Afghanistan and other countries. And I think we're entering a period where we're going to have to stand back and say, now, there's only so much we can really do. Let's just concentrate on what's important. And I think in the financial world, which is not my field of expertise, it is yours, that it's disappointing as an American to see the excesses that were committed by many financiers on Wall Street, who really brought no great gains to the overall economy, but great wealth to themselves.
You know, and I think it's, as we begin this segment in here, you made a comment about the human aspect or element of
right.
What Reagan did so well. We had a Russian businessman in our office today, and he has a business doing very, very quite well. And also being face to face, you realize that the people in these other countries that we felt were so different and demonstrative, they're just like us. And so I think I like the aspect of getting back to the human side.
Yep.
We've been visiting here today with Ty Cobb. Ty served as a special economic assistant to President Ronald Reagan and the National Security Affairs. Ty, thank you for coming on today's show.
Alan, it's a real pleasure. It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
We'll be right back after these messages.
Even in times of financial uncertainty, GROCO has been recognized as an expert in the tax field.
People come to us when they need help managing their affairs. They want solid financial advice while lowering their tax burden.
For over 40 years, GROCO has been a trusted advisor to many of Silicon Valley's most successful entrepreneurs when dealing with the IRS and state tax authorities. We can provide a level of personal attention you won't find at national CPA firms.
For your time and for your wealth, call GROCO today.